Why Adam Smith is important. Adam Smith, 1723 to 1790, was a Scottish philosopher and economist who is best known as the author of An Inquiry into the Nation and Causes of the Wealth of Nations in 1776, one of the most influential books ever written. The Productivity of Free Exchange. Smith showed that this vast mercantilist edifice was folly. He argued that in a free exchange, both sides became better off. Quite simply, nobody would trade if they expected to lose from it. The buyer profits just as the seller does. Imports are just as valuable to us as our exports are to others. Because trade benefits both sides, says Smith, it increases our prosperity just as surely as do agriculture or manufacture. A nation's wealth is not the quantity of gold and silver in its vaults, but the total of its production and commerce, what today we would call gross national product. The wealth of nations deeply influenced the politicians of the time and provided the intellectual foundation of the great 19th century era of free trade and economic expansion. Even today, the common sense of free trade is accepted worldwide, whatever the practical difficulties of achieving it. Smith had a radical, fresh understanding of how human societies actually work. He realized that social harmony would emerge naturally as human beings struggled to find ways to live and work with each other. Freedom and self-interest need not produce chaos, but, as if guided by an invisible hand, order and conquered. And as people struck bargains with each other, the nation's resources would be drawn automatically to the ends and purposes that people valued most highly. Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. The philosopher, social scientist, historian, and revolutionary Karl Marx is without a doubt the most influential socialist thinker to emerge in the 19th century. Although he was largely ignored by scholars in his own lifetime, his social, economic, and political ideas gained rapid acceptance to the socialist movement after his death in 1883. Until quite recently, almost half the population of the world lived under regimes that claimed to be Marxist. This very success, however, has meant that the original ideas of Marx have often been modified and his meanings adapted to a great variety of political circumstances. In addition, the fact that Marx delayed publication of many of his writings meant that it has been only recently that scholars had the opportunity to appreciate Marx's intellectual stature. Marx's major work on political economy made slow progress. By 1857, he had produced a gigantic 800-page manuscript on capital, landed property, wage labor, the state, foreign trade, and the world market. The Grundrisse, or Outlines, was not published until 1941. In the early 1860s, he broke off his work to compose 3 large volumes, Theories of Surplus Value, which discussed the theoreticians of political economy, particularly Adam Smith and David Ricardo. It was not until 1867 that Marx was able to publish the first results of his work in Volume 1 of Capital, a work which analyzed the capitalist progress of production. In Capital, Marx elaborated his version of the labor theory value and his conception of surplus value and exploitation, which will ultimately lead to a falling rate of profit and the collapse of industrial capitalism. Volumes 2 and 3 were finished during the 1860s, but Marx worked on the manuscripts for the rest of his life, and they were published posthumously by Engels. Marx's health did not improve. He traveled to European spas and even to Algeria in search of recuperation. The deaths of his eldest daughter and his wife clouded the last years of his life. Marx died March 14, 1883, and was buried at Highgate Cemetery in northern London. Marx's contribution to our understanding of society has been enormous. His thought is not the comprehensive system evolved by some of his followers under the name of dialectical materialism. The very dialectical nature of his approach meant that it was usually tentative and open-ended. There was also the tension between Marx the political activist and Marx the student of political economy. Many of his expectations about the future course of the revolutionary movement have, so far, failed to materialize. However, his stress on the economic factor in society and his analysis of the class structure and class conflict have had an enormous influence on history, sociology, and study of human culture.